What I think is different here, and I think this is generational in age as much as anything else. It's like now the shoe's on the other foot. Like, let's be clear, technology over the last 30 years has completely destroyed what used to be other massive industries.
So that means hopefully we are going to see the good things in the near future.
We have to tell ourselves that, right? As entrepreneurs. I think so. I do think we're at a bit of a nadir.
I also think so, because I think that companies can't stay longer in that mode.
There. I think the thing that is great about remote work, first and foremost, let's not bury the lead here. It's that when you're dealing with a very specialized set of skills, you're dealing with very niche or very a very high expertise space that is not widely, that is not anything near like even 1% of the population.
There are two types of companies. One company is which is doing services or consulting, right? There are other soft companies who build products and work on those. But your company has this special thing. You guys are doing services, you're providing services, and then you build successful products as well.
You can throw 5% in the money market, get 5% return in the money market. It suddenly doesn't look so attractive to make bets on startups, make bets on new technology, make bets on new companies. It's hard to get a real calibration on how much that's influenced, but I think there's no question it has some influence on the buying patterns and spending patterns.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to introduce you to an amazing tech star, Jake Goldman. He has been running multiple companies, and today we have brought to you Jake Goldman because they have a big news of a merger, right? And hello Jake, how are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. So Jake, in the start, I want you to give your introduction, and do not give the news right now, because we are going to do that in the end.
You got it. So I think you set it up well. I'm Jake. I'm I like to think of myself as originally sort of an engineer by trade, a bit of a user experience designer. And about 12 and a half years ago now, I started a company called 10up. That's 10UP. And we are a professional services company, a digital agency. We make largely websites, some applications on the web, occasionally a mobile application. And do that for clients scattered throughout around the world with a team scattered throughout around the world. We have bootstrapped this company, starting with me working in an office in Rhode Island in the United States by myself, writing code, writing proposals, doing what's probably closer to freelance. By the end of the first year, we were, thanks to all the networks and contacts I'd built over the previous 10 years doing this work, we were launching sites for clients like TechCrunch and had 8 full-time employees. And now here we are 12 and a half years later. And I still play a major role in leading this team of about 300 full-time bodies, more than that now, as we'll get to later. Still spend about a third of my time doing business development, doing growth and sales and marketing, about a third of my time on, I guess, what you call top-level strategy for where we're going and how we're challenging problems facing technology and development and agencies, many of which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then the third is just, I sort of call it custodial duties, whatever the team needs from me in any given week.
Right. So that means you're doing a lot of work, man. You should rest.
There are some long weeks in the journey.
That's a part of the journey. And we are going to discuss your journey as well. So tell us about your journey, right? How did you start that? Because you started working for others, right? And then you converted yourself and you started doing business. So how was the initial part of your journey, and what was the motivation that led you to work?
Yeah, great question. So it sort of depends when you consider my journey to have started. I like to think that I was working on websites and interested in tech and entrepreneurship probably since I was in high school, sort of tinkering with the first generation of the web, and before there was even things like CSS and some of the technologies we take for granted. I did consulting, I did independent work, sort of freelancing from the time I was probably 16 or 17 years old. Always had something going on the side, always thought someday I wanted to start my own business. Went from school, went to work for about 10 years for professional services firms and contractors and agencies in services, learned from some great mentors, learned from some great leaders for about a decade. In around 2011, it was clear to me and the owner of an agency I worked for at the time that that partnership no longer made sense. I thought, having built a decade of contacts and relationships and really having learned from some great mentors, that it was a great time to start, let's call it my business building entrepreneurial journey, which was 10 Up. My theory at the time was a bit of like, I have these contacts, I have these relationships. I don't know that I want to be writing code forever for myself. I'd like to build something bigger. I'd like to have a team around me. And I think I'm ready to be my own boss, which is what led me to start the business. Also thought it was a very good time to make some bets on technologies and solutions that I thought would grow quickly in the market. In 2011, for me, that was WordPress as a open source platform. I was sort of focused on open source for the last couple of years, saw that platform, implemented some sites with that platform, and thought this thing is going places. You can do some really special work with this platform. More and more large businesses are buying into it. And there's no sort of like default solution provider. There's no, like you would think of in the Drupal space, like a Lullabot at the time, there's no sort of default agencies of record. So sort of took a bet. I'm going to focus on that technology, build great partnerships, really focus on the contribution and the marketing that can position my company to be one of the leaders in that space. And I think that, short version is, I think that's a journey that took off.
Right. So that means it was pre-planned. When you're working for other companies, you do have this thing in mind that eventually you're going to start your own business and be your own boss, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I was always a little bit fluid about that, always open-minded. Could it be a partnership? Maybe there is a role in some company. But I think if you were to like ask me to do some very deep soul searching, I would have told you that I think it's just a matter of time until I'm ready to start my own thing, be my own boss, lead my own, sort of make my own destiny.
Right. And the one thing I can see in your company's career or journey of your company, there are two types of companies. One company is which is doing services or consulting, right? There are other soft companies who build products and work on those things, right? But your company has this special thing. You guys are doing services, you're providing services, and then you build successful products as well. So that's a huge transformation itself, right? So
very different way of thinking.
How you were able to manage that, to do services successfully and then build a product as well successfully?
I think that if I was to give you a very heartfelt and honest answer, I'm not sure how successful I would say our forays into products were. I think we have done, so we have sort of like free products that are more like lead generation for our services. Of the commercial products we've really had two in our history, one of which is still ongoing. The first one, I would say, sort of sputtered, and then eventually we retired it, I think, formally, maybe 5 years ago, product called PushUp. And then we have a current ongoing product that I think is much more successful than that one. It's a product called ElasticPress, which is a SaaS service that connects to what is a free plugin that brings the power of Elasticsearch to WordPress's platform. I would say that I would describe that one as successful in the sense that it has good customers, it does decent recurring business, provides a lot of value to customers we get in other directions. But I also would not, without not giving it its due, would not put it nearly in the category of success that 10 Up sees. It's probably 1% maybe of our entire revenue as a business. So it's successful in the sense that it's ongoing, it's well supported, it's financially profitable. But I do think that one of the reasons that second product was more successful is we built a team to be focused on it. I think one of the real challenges you have as a services business that also has products is it's very hard to not in your heart be very focused on one or the other at the other's detriment. I think in my DNA, in my genes, I'm more of a services guy. I'm more of a provide solutions to people that own those products. And where we have been successful with products, it's because I provided the leadership and carved out a space for those leaders to give it that focus that I, for instance, have not been able to do. I would not describe myself as a successful product entrepreneur. I was a successful services entrepreneur that helped some people be successful leading products.
Right. So that means that when you started doing that Elasticsearch, the difference was that you created a focused team who was working on that.
Yes.
So who was leading that team? It was you, or you brought someone else?
So there was a member of our team that I thought was ready to sort of shift their roles. I think in their hearts were more interested in products and productized solutions and services. Somebody already on the team, but ready to make a shift in leadership, was passionate about that solution, was passionate about the business modeling of products, gave him and a couple of lieutenants, a couple of other leaders that he was working closely with that were also very passionate about that kind of business, gave them the reins to really drive it forward. I'd say that I'm involved in the sense of accountability, looking at P&Ls, looking at how it's actually performing, some hands on like when we do marketing, I want it to be harmonious with our parent brand, but largely in terms of product development, product roadmap, prioritizing, servicing customers, building the model for 24/7 support. It was largely an exercise in delegation on my part.
Right. I completely get that idea. So my next question is related to the same thing, right? Because we are techies. I am a techie, you are a techie, right? We think in a different direction. We think in a way that we are going to solve the problem, right? That is an entirely different mindset from a marketer. Marketers have a
Mm-hmm.
different mind, and they think and look at the things differently. Who was handling all the marketing stuff of Elasticsearch?
It's a great question. So I would say that the really a shared responsibility. So the team that I mentioned that took ownership of the solution, I think when it comes to like the how to say it, like the table stakes of marketing, having a website, having a social media presence, putting out some blog posts, putting out some sort of low hanging fruit, I think they really took ownership. They involved me in the sense that they would sometimes bring resources from our larger agency, from our larger team. So they wouldn't hire their own designer to design like a website, the website elasticpress.io. They would sort of get some resources from the parent company 10 Up. I think when it comes to like a larger marketing strategy, going out and doing doing really aggressive content marketing, doing ad buys, doing slick boosts. I think if I'm being honest with you, and I think this reflects the challenge of being a services and product company, I don't know that we've ever done that very well, because I do think it speaks to the split attention. That team, that product is not so successful financially that we could dedicate full-time resources to the product and marketing. So it kind of gets resources from the parent company supporting some of those activities that are, I'd say, more or less commiserate with sort of the revenue it generates for the company, which, as I said before, is like in that 1% kind of territory. In fact, I think because it was more of an engineering-led organization within Elastic Press, and because sort of the marketers and the team never gave it the same energy and attention and focus, it's one of those ways where I think trying to be both as a company is in some ways held back its success.
Right. I'm asking you these questions because I have failed in many products. The thing is, I used to say that the motto of software companies is earn money from the services, invest in the products, empty your bank accounts, then go back to services, earn more money, and then invest again. So,
That is not
I
uncommon.
yeah, I hope you can relate that.
Very much so. I mean, I've always enjoyed services and liked services, but I know many entrepreneurs who I would say are in my space, but probably feel like services what exact same story. Services is what they have to do to try to figure out how they get
Yeah.
a product
So,
to be successful.
what I learned from my last failure was that we are good in building products. So I learned that we should do what we are good at, and from that time we are only focused on services, and we are doing well because I believe that you should bring people who are better than you. If I'm
Hmm.
bringing someone in the marketing side, then he should tell me that what I should do. If I am telling him that you need to do this, 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 that means that he's not idiot, right?
Yep.
So that is the story which I have figured out from my last failure.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I think it's easy to fall into a pattern where you sort of settle. But I agree, if you're going to have somebody really lead a product, lead an initiative, lead a service, if you find that you're having to frequently say we need to do this, they're probably not the right they're probably not the right leader for that part of the organization. They need to be motivated, they need to be empowered, you need to have them not be dependent on you as a leader. I think it's very easy for us as entrepreneurs to, I think, in the absence of always having the perfect people all the time available to us, and wanting to give people a chance and wanting to make sure we're doing our part. Our job is to do more than just give them money. It is to give some counsel, some direction. It can be sometimes difficult to find that, find the line between just do it all of yourself and don't talk to me, and don't be dependent on me.
Yeah, so that means you do have that decentralized kind of leadership.
I don't know if I would call it decentralized. I would say I think we have good centralized leadership in terms of there's a very clear org chart, there's a very clear reporting structure.
Right.
Decentralized in the sense of like wanting a lot of autonomy for those leaders. I
Well.
think that's accurate.
So uh, in software companies, most of the time we have very cool environment. And in that environment, we do have a lot of fun stories as well. Sometimes it comes during the interviews that some hilarious situations arises. Do you remember such stories that happened to you?
I'm trying to think of some good ones. Maybe you have to give me a little bit more time
Yeah,
in this
we
conversation.
had a lot of time.
Early in the morning on Thursday, three quarters of the way through the week, I'm trying to dig back into my memory.
Hey, brother.
Um, I can think of ironic stories. I'm not so sure about like the laugh out loud, how many laugh out loud funny
I
stories there are.
usually terrible.
Um, I know we've had, yeah, I know we've had moments like, where we've launched a solution based on an assumption or based on figuring that, this company was going to do its part and hook up that piece and never actually validating that and realizing there was just a silly gap just from under communication. But at the risk of feeling a little bit sad and lame, like we don't have a lot of humor going on, I'll be honest, I'm blanking on a great laugh out loud story at the moment.
That's so sad. I can tell you thousands of them.
I'm sure we have them. They're just not jumping into my head.
Right. So what happened with us was that a developer was working on a product, right, and client asked some changes, and it's been 3 days, and he's still working on that, and he's saying one thing that I am making changes, and on server they are not replicating. I'm talking about the old days when we were used to work with the FTP, FileZilla, etc. Right? There
Yep.
was
Yep.
Git was not that much mature, so I'm talking about that time. So I said, okay, show me the code. I checked it, and within 5 minutes, I said, you are updating on a wrong server. So he was looking at a different server and updating a different server. So
Yep.
that was hilarious at that time, and I was like, oh my god, what are you doing? Okay,
Yes, I'm
so
sure.
yeah, I hope I
I'm
gave you
sure
some.
we've had some of those just classic, like, where you forget that you have a CDN turned on and you're trying to do a release and everybody's wondering why it looks the same. Yeah.
Right. So let's go toward the other side. In
Yeah.
your journey, where you have seen a lot of success, what was the most hardest time?
Yeah. I mean, it's, there I could talk all day. You don't do this for 12 years and not have many hard moments. I think what I would say is for me, the hardest moments have always been related to the people side of the business. It's always when there's churn and restlessness in the team that are the hardest for me in terms of making sure I can create the right environment, show up and not be distracted, show up and be focused. I think there's both the practical side, which is like the risk of disruption in your team and disrupting the experience that your clients need to have. But there's also like, there's an emotional part, which is putting on a brave face aside. I also think I can be a very emotional person. I like to think that I have a decent amount of emotional intelligence in terms of when my team feels unsettled, my team feels restless, I feel unsettled and restless. So I think of moments like in our third or fourth year, we worked through this. We brought on board one of the best decisions we made, by the way. We brought on board our current CEO, John Ekman, because I wanted a real, true partner in day-to-day operating, running the business. I didn't want the business to be dependent on my health at any given moment. I just needed, as we scaled up the company, that kind of equal in running the business. Having built the company at that point up to about 50 people or so over 3 years, 3.5 years at that point, I had lieutenants that were used to being sort of my number twos or like the closest thing I had at that point as partners. Some of them were very upset about that decision. I thought they had interviewed. I thought they were on board with the concept. I don't think I did really stop to pause the train running to really validate that. And there's some people that I considered vital players at the company that were pretty upset that there wasn't an internal promotion, that I brought somebody in from the outside. Now, I don't think it was the wrong decision. I still think I made the right decision at the time, but I think I could have handled it better. I think I could have done better change management. I think I could have had better conversations with those individuals to seed for it. And it really it was a real low point for me because you're only 40 or 50 people as a team. Every senior player is, at that scale is essential. You can't afford to lose them because it's too big that you can just take it over. But it's also, small enough that you really feel the impact across your team. And so we worked through it. We figured it out, but it was a real low point for me where I thought there's a real risk I was going to lose on hiring this exciting, wonderful new exciting CEO, pretty penny as well, that we brought on board, that there was a real risk of losing some key talent. I'd say this, similarly, second hardest stretch for me would have been, it would have been just a couple of years ago. I mean, I think when, the 2020s are a blur, that sort of late 2021 to mid 2022, when the whole industry was doing this like musical chairs. Turns out that doesn't work out so well in the long term, but the whole industry was just completely overheated in the tech sector. Everybody was doing musical chairs coming in and out of companies. Again, I think we got through it very successfully at the end of the day. I think we did a lot better than a lot of other companies in the space, but there's nothing that makes you sit, in your chair in the backyard and want to stare off into the yonder, like, some of these months in that period where it's just, 2-3 good players out of 250 leaving in a stretch of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes. Some disciplines did fine, but other disciplines that were smaller and more nascent were more heavily hit and impacted by those changes. And, it's funny, I can deal well with like economic retrenchment in terms of like making it harder to find sales or harder to find deals. Those are trying times, but I can punch through those. But the team restlessness, the personnel churn, the people that I come to think of as my partners, people that I'd like to think I've helped boost up, people that I count on for my day-to-day flow and operations. Those are those sleepless nights. Those are those long stretches of days where you just feel like it's a grind. You wonder why you're doing this.
Yeah.
We got pause there. I've been rambling.
I can completely relate that. So tell me one thing. When there was unrest in the team, how you were able to handle that part? Because, okay, unrest is there. You can sense it, right? Being the leader, you can sense the unrest. Even if nobody says, you can sense it, right? But eventually you realize that you have to handle that as well. So what was the key point, how you handled it?
That's a great question. And I'm trying to keep myself honest in thinking about the answer. I think there are multiple facets. One is you need to find some compartmentalization just for your own personal mental health to push through it, which is to find some activities, find some things that are not just working all the time, to get your mind off of it, to step back. There's also a bit of like one of the, I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but when you're on an entrepreneurial journey and you've been doing it for over a decade, there is a bit of like, you can stop and pause in that moment. Remember, I have been through these times before. I got through it then. I can get through it now. That gives you sort of the personal energy to get through it. I think on the more like tactical professional front, I think, there is a bit of like trying to think about how you communicate to the team, showing recognition of what is happening with the team, trying to introduce policy prescriptions and new programs to address feedback that you're hearing, to make the team feel heard, to adjust to the mood of the team, to share news that's exciting, to roll out new programs, create release valves for people where they need them. Where you can, when you have higher periods of unrest, where you can sort of accelerate advancements or promotions to get a bit more of a boost of energy and excitement and a bit more of a tether on the team. I think those are things I've deployed at those times. And then just for the people that aren't being noisy, the people that aren't being squeaky wheels, giving them extra attention so you kind of have that base that you can count on. You also have to find your confidants in the team, whether that's for me, like our CEO like John, or a couple of other of our most senior executives. You have to build those relationships in the team. Even if you're not true equal partners in ownership in the organization, you need those spiritual partners that you can let your hair down, that you can talk about how you're feeling, that you can talk about what your stressors are, that you can turn into problem solvers with you, who can also bring different insights, can give you a perspective on what they're hearing that you might not be hearing directly. So I guess to summarize, finding that personal space, trying to take a moment to remember that hard times are inevitable, put it in perspective. It's not the end of your business. It's not the end of the world. And then tactically giving attention to people that deserve it, making sure that you're recognizing, getting insights to what the team is failing, in advancing, giving people opportunities for advancement, opportunities to be heard when you need that sort of rock in your team.
Right. That discussion got so much intense, but every word of that I can say that I can relate it, because we do face a lot of such stuff where there's unrest, where you have to handle it, because managing people is far more difficult than managing anything else. So
I think
that I can relate completely. And we do have to face it day-to-day basis. We do have to manage it day-to-day basis. So because it was intense discussion, I would love if you can now tell us the story of your merger.
yeah, sure. That's a celebratory moment. So, I mean, apropos of sort of strengths and weaknesses and where I've been over the last 12 years, I really had a moment, I would say, circa 2022, maybe after some of those hardships, but it was not a new idea for me, which was okay, we're at, just to be direct about it, we're at $40 million and growing as a business. We're at around 300 people and still growing. I had a real moment of like, okay, I'm at the stage where I think I need true, partners and ownership, different kind of like financial governance, you know, to be able to get the company to the next stage, be able to get the company to the next level. I don't like how dependent this company is on having a sole financial owner that doesn't have the, a certain acumen what it means to grow a company from 40 million to $80 million. So I really talked to my executive team and started this journey of, I think we need to think more seriously. It doesn't have to be a year from now. It doesn't have to be 2 years from now. It doesn't have to be 3 years from now, but at some point before it's like, we're well past our prime, well past the time we should have done it. We need to start this journey of like, where can we join forces? Where can we find partners in this business? So that led me through an exploration journey, working with some partners, with a great company called Merger Tech that helped me try to self-examine what we're looking for, what would be a good fit for 10up, and then make a lot of introductions for us and help us actually work out the sort of the financial components and legal components of a deal. In that journey of being much more proactive of exploring who we might fit in with, we met a company called Fueled Digital Media, complementary business to us in the sense that like we weren't doing the exact same thing. We're both digital marketing. We're both in the digital solution space. They were extremely strong and competent, like in iOS apps, Android apps, some very custom web applications. Hadn't really cracked the code on CMS or marketing websites. We started, so you had that baseline, sort of similarly remote companies with people scattered all around the world, some sort of basic sort of company values, principles that seem to align. And I think we hit it off right away. Felt very natural in terms of the leadership of both companies. Felt like these PR people, when I met with them, that could have just been dropped into a 10up leadership or executive meeting. We would have just said those were great hires. That matched well with us. Very quickly found that we both had clients that felt like they were such obvious fits for the other one's services. And so went through this process to figure out, okay, how do we do this financially? How do we do this in terms of the legal structure? That's how do we both vet each other to make sure we feel good about the health and the state of each company and the tools and technologies we use. That was a multi-month journey going back several months. I guess we tied the knot about a month ago, finished the legal paperwork, and now we are merged with this company Fueled. And right now we're operating more like two brands, very focused with strong brand equity in our spaces, with really sharing of some resources, sharing of some technologies, sharing of like leads and business development strategies. But we're on a journey, I would say, over the next couple of years to figure out how do we really fully blend together as one business, providing a full digital services solution to all of our clients. So that's the headlines version. So it's big and exciting. I'm no longer a majority owner in the business. I'm now a minority shareholder in the overall business.
Right.
I got
And
12
what
years
will be the
through
name
that
of
journey.
this
Like,
merger?
12 years after being my own boss, I could not be more excited to have a boss and have a board of directors. So that's where I
Things
am
are
today.
going to be difficult now.
What was that?
Things are going to be difficult, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah.
A million tiny details, things you don't even think about before, like how do we put these two Google workspaces together, and we have different single sign-ons and different the tiny little things, and of course up to the big things that take months and months. Will probably take a year to figure out, like what's the brand journey for these two businesses, what do management structures look like in the future, what do hiring practices look like, and comp ranges and benefits for the team looks like. So there's a ton of work, but maybe I'm in the honeymoon phase, but I actually feel very energized by it. It's refreshing to me. It's refreshing to not be the guy in the corner, the only guy in the corner office at the end of the day. So I feel I honestly feel a renewed energy out of it.
Nice. That's a good approach. So now let's talk about the challenge you and I are going to face. Talk about AI, generative AI, and its impact. What do you think about that?
First, can we clarify? You're real, right? You're not a bot.
Let me think. So please let us know. What do you
Well,
think? How AI and generative AI is going to take over the whole scene, and
yeah.
what is going to happen in the near future?
It's such a good question, and it is a question of our times. And we think a lot about it. At 10up, we have a whole working group committed to like, let's get innovative, get creative, let's break some rules where clients are amenable to AI. We actually have a solution out there for the publishers. We have a plugin called Classify. It's spelled AI at the end, that does for WordPress sort of helps publishers take advantage of AI. So you can do things like when you want to add an image to your post, you can do a generative, like right then and there inside the CMS, generate an image, automatically tagging and categorizing content using ChatGPT APIs, doing things like expanding and contracting text in paragraphs using those APIs, automatically putting alt descriptions on images by scanning them. So we're all in sort of like on publisher enablement. What we are still, of course, trying to figure out and wrestle with is what it means for us as technologists and engineers. Now, I will take for a moment here, I will take a positive view for a moment and put this in a historical lens. When I talk to my team about this, there's no question that change is going to happen, but I don't think it's as clear that, especially when we talk about sort of short to midterm, next 3 to 4 to 5 years, that it's a totally destructive force as opposed to a major force of change. What I mean by that is like, throughout, if you look at the sort of 50, 60-year course of history and software development change, there have been major changes throughout that cycle that are also very transformative. The move to UIs over text parsers, the tools we have now to build, websites or web applications, web interfaces are a fraction of the difficulty. I mean, I remember taking classes learning how to write assembly code, which was the first generation of programming. I would argue that the leap from where we are today in terms of engineering to taking advantage of things like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot are actually smaller leaps than going from something like a writing machine assembly code to something like C or C++ in terms of like a major reduction in complexity and effort. Today we have WYSIWYG tools sometimes that we can use to get most of the interface pretty far along, even before AI, before you start writing the more complicated code on the back end. If you asked an engineer 20 years ago, like what's involved in like writing a Swift or a PHP application or a Node application, I think they would probably laugh at the what we think is complicated, right? We're not dealing with memory stacks and memory management and moving memory data banks, which is to say, like, consistently over 50 years, technology has gotten demonstrably easier to ship things, major shifts in how much effort it takes. But the software industry hasn't shrunk. The number of developers has not shrunk as a result of that. The number of things being built has not gone down. The economy didn't shrink when we went from assembly code to writing C. It actually exploded, and it's larger than it's ever been in its history. So I think you can look at these tools in the midterm and say, you need to keep up, as is consistent with history, you need to keep up with this change to stay competitive. But I don't think it spells in the near term destruction of the field. Like we're just going to have huge companies that just have AI writing all their software. It's just going to shift what we spend our energy on, what we spend our focus on software development, and introduce our ability to go even faster in shipping things we've maybe never had time for before, could never build with the same quality or the same experience. And hopefully leave more time for creativity and quality checking and trying new kind of solutions out that were sort of out of reach in terms of effort before. Now, longer term, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know. I mean, there's what's that show, Succession? Everything changes all the time. Is there a world in 30 years where there's major, 20 years, even 10 years, where there's a more massive destruction where you don't need a fraction? That's possible.
Right.
We don't have horse and buggy shops anymore, right?
So,
Printing presses and publishing, but
okay. So I was saying, we have seen the evolution. The difference in that and right now is, previously things were improving, like coding practices were improving, we were getting things easier, right? But now the thing is, the whole work is going to be done by the AI. So what do you think? Software engineers are going to code websites or mobile applications which they are right now. Are they going to code it in the future as well, or AI is going to code that? And as you said, that we are going to focus on the creative part of it and empathy part
I
of
think
it.
I think
What do
there
you
will
think?
be a shift to the creative part. And again, it depends whether we're talking about sort of midterm or long term. Midterm, I think it'll be a tool to accelerate how fast you can build and how much you can build in a certain amount of time. I don't think, maybe I'll leave these words. I don't think in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to continue to see the leaps in generative AI where a business can skip needing software developers to put the pieces together using those tools. And I think to use a maybe more specific example from like the history of software development, not to minimize how in the long term fundamental this shift can be, it's not just that it's a little bit easier and faster. Like I'll go back to that memory management example. Like 15 years ago, even writing software, you would have to spend a decent amount of your time writing software worried about like, how do I make sure I don't overflow memory and the application doesn't crash? Like I remember in my classes when I was in school learning how to do like memory management and memory, and it was a huge amount of like effort to make something perform in fast. Does anybody do that anymore unless you're writing like OS level functions? Rarely. Maybe for some of the largest, most complicated applications. That's an entire problem in software development that I would argue for 95% of software development today has completely gone away and is just solved for by technology now in software. It hasn't meant fewer jobs for developers. It's meant probably developers' lives being better. It's meant more time for creativity. It means we can more quickly ship. There's so many applications and so many ideas out there that still haven't been created. I think you still need, so I would still argue, at least again, 4 to 5 years, it's that what we need to be able to transform as a company, and this is not easy, we could talk about this, it's not an easy shift for an established company. What we need to be doing is figuring out how can we move at twice the velocity, not eliminate, not in total do less work, but here's a bunch of ideas maybe people couldn't afford to pay us for 3 years ago that now suddenly they should be able to afford paying us for because we can do them twice as fast.
Right, right,
Does
right.
that make sense?
It does make sense because shift is real, right? And how much effect it is going to create, that is the thing we all have to look. And let's see, let's hope we survive. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing,
I
which
mean,
is like,
it's
yeah,
not the only, it's not the only field that I think when you look at the longer term, 10, 20 years will be massively
yeah,
disrupted. Like,
yeah,
do I think the world I mean, it's a silly statement, right? Do I think the world in 30 years or 40 years looks anything like the economy of today? No, but didn't 30 or 40 years ago either, right? That's an inevitability. Hopefully, our businesses will learn how to evolve, or we'll go off to our next entrepreneurial ventures. By that time, we'll be retired, maybe in 30 or 40 years. But what I think is different here. I mean, I think this is generational in age as much as anything else. Is like now the shoe's on the other foot. Like, let's be clear, technology over the last 30 years has completely destroyed what used to be other massive industries, right? Like media and publishing, right? Like printing a newspaper and shipping has been one of the most lucrative businesses in the world 20 years, I mean, 15 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. Now we just have to accept that, like, we don't get to be the ones riding above it all. We have to accept that it's going to be hard and it's going to be transformational and we have to make change.
okay. Let's talk about the remote work because I know you have been hiring talent from all over the world, and you are hiring from everywhere. So, what are the pros and cons of remote work? And you have to tell me honest answer.
Yeah, I know no other way. And so, just as context, as you said, I know we mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but I feel like the context that's important here is TenUp has been fully remote since we started. In our first year in 2011, all of our team is scattered all over the world. We once briefly had a studio office for where we had a handful of people that we ended up getting rid of 2 years later because we're a remote company first. And it was actually strange coming in for some people to come into an office and just get on their headset and dial into meetings outside of the office. So we're very much all in on remote, but I am not, I've given talks about this in lectures at universities, and I'm not starry-eyed. I'm not a preacher that's going to say there's no other way. I actually don't believe that at all there's no other way. I actually like to say if we invented like Star Trek's transporters, that I'd probably have an office and try to get everybody to come in once a week if there was no real friction there. I think the thing that is great about remote work, first and foremost, let's not bury the lead here. It's that when you're dealing with a very specialized set of skills, you're dealing with very niche or very a very high expertise space that is not widely, that is not anything near like even 1% of the population being expert in it. It's simply talent to access. The real name of the game is when you're dealing with unique high skill specialization, it's not trying to put a pin down on the map and saying, I'm going to draw a 30-mile radius around this pin, and everybody who's great at what I do is going to live here. But I can go out and find talent all over the world that is the very best at what they do with a much wider talent pool and a much wider labor market. That is the main reason. Now, there are a lot of other benefits to doing so. There's a like spiritual, like green benefit of like, there is a silliness, I think, of like we all get in our cars and drive to a different air conditioned space in the summer and then drive back home to the other air conditioned. There's some of that. There are absolutely people out there who are more introverted, who thrive in a space where they have privacy and quiet in their home office and will just never be as effective or productive. Not everybody, but there are certainly people that meet that mold. But there are absolutely downsides as well. I mean, there is a certain different kind of empathy you have for somebody when you sit next to them. That is, as much as we can promote, it's video on, it's one-on-ones, it's lots of social interaction. It's not quite the same as getting to go to the bar or the restaurant with your friends at night from the perspective of the individual. I think one of the dangers of our increasingly remote economy, speaking of my earlier comments about personnel churn, it's another thing that makes it even easier to be very transient, moving between jobs. It's one thing to quit a company when you've played foosball with them or you sat next to them and learned from them, or you go out at night to restaurants, you go on happy hours, you do, regular like meetups with your team locally. It's a whole other thing to say, I'm going to, I'm going to pick up tomorrow, go back to the same desk at a different remote job and see different faces on a Zoom call or a Google Meet call or something. It's just another way that we make our workforce, make the economy even more transient, more gig-like. And I think that can be both hard for a business if you value stability of workforce. And I think, frankly, this is maybe a different conversation, also very dangerous for the economy in terms of the loss of productivity from people constantly, job hopping or chair swapping between different companies. So I guess, the short version is like the camaraderie, the attachment to the people that you work with. Those softer issues are, I think, the biggest challenge.
I think that is pretty much comprehensive, and you have covered almost everything. Because yes, team building activities, those are missing, right? And the access to talent is a real challenge, which you clear it through remote hirings and hiring talent from all over the world, because we are providing resources all over the world. I can relate that. People are facing a lot of challenges, finding talent and spending a lot of money on that, and facing a lot of issues. So we do resolve that kind of issues as well. Okay, so because we are talking about the economy and the effects of remote work on the economy as well, I would like to have your comment on the layoffs which tech industry has faced right now in the recent times. What do you think about that? What do you think about the world economy squeezing and how it has impacted you, whether it has or not?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no kidding that the macroeconomic squeeze on technology from a short-term microeconomic perspective, like we've seen that. I think we're very lucky in that we have a strong sales force and a strong sales team that can plug a lot of those holes. But there's no question this year compared to the last 3 years or last 4 years, maybe excluding that 3-month window at the beginning of COVID, that we're seeing more than ever people entrench on budgets, be more reluctant to spend much money, pull back budgets to spend more internally. There's no question we're feeling some of that squeeze as we see companies across the industry sort of retrench, cut spending wherever they can. So we're definitely feeling some of that. I think we've been very lucky. We haven't had to get to the point where we've had to ourselves make a structured workforce reduction. But we feel that pressure. I feel that pressure right now. And it mostly drives me harder right now to focus on business development, making sure when those instances happen that we can fill the hole. I think, to take a larger view that is not just about the, 6-month stretch of account development and sales and business growth. I think what I think was even worse than the cycle that we're in now, which is people retrenching on budgets, was a cycle that preceded it, which was so overheated as a market that nobody can keep up with the rising costs across the board, that everybody is unsettled, everybody, the whole workforce is playing musical chairs. I think that was even more disruptive to what it meant to do business, both within 10up and across our clients. Like, forget my team, like probably 30-40% of my client stakeholders left, switched jobs at that time. It was very unsettling, very disruptive to the team. To take, I guess, that larger view for a moment here, like, I hope I don't sound overly cynical about this, but I also think, like, we as a technology industry probably have a bit of a reckoning here. It should not surprise us that when we completely when we completely blow up the workforce in the sense of like tech monoliths with massive budgets nobody outside of those behemoths can compete with, hoovering up talent from across the industry, when talent feels like I'll just, at the drop of a better offer with just ridiculous sums of money sometimes, or all like, we'll all just play musical chairs because we're all tired and want to shift and do something else. I don't think we should be surprised that this happens a year later. To say it a bit crudely, turns out when 30-40% of the industry switches places and the entire industry gets something like a 10 or 20 or 25% compensation increase, turns out that doesn't work well in the long term. It turns out that's not actually good for businesses at the macro level, and we should not be entirely surprised that there's a whiplash on that 1 year later, where companies start to struggle with, hey, it turns out people brand new to the job, a third of my workforce, are not as good or not as ready or not as productive or not as efficient, especially when half of them moved because they felt like they wanted easier jobs and an easier life. So sorry to be a little ranty about that. It's a bit of a cynical take, but I do think, I hope in some part there's a bit of a reckoning of like, there's some reckoning here for, we reap what we sow.
Got it. So how much time do you think it will take to make things normal?
I mean, that's a great question. I wish I was better at that forecasting. If you asked me a year ago, I would say we're in a 2-year stretch of very hard labor market. Now we flip the other way. The number of times the equation has flipped around over the last 3 years, from March 2020, oh my God, we have, every agent, every company, we have to lay people off because we're not going to have jobs, we're not going to have work, to, oh no, digital is exploding because everyone wants to do remote, hire everybody back, to like, it's been a pretty exhausting decade so far. So I don't know that I'm good at predicting when things are going to change. If I was to take an optimistic view, I try to take an optimistic view. I do think this year in particular, in 2023, has been a bit of the like retrenchment whiplash year from the previous year. I do think sort of by the mandate across the board from CFOs and CROs and CEOs is, whoa, Nelly, 2022, we spent way more than we should have been spending on all of this. Costs got out of control. Hunker down in 2023. And I have some optimism that as we get past that period, that correction, and into 2024, that people will start to say, maybe it's time to spend again. Maybe it's time to think, now that we sort of overcorrected in the other direction, let's come back to a median. If you want to take the macroeconomic view, we also have to acknowledge, at least when we talk about the United States, where we do most of our business, where a lot of the world does its business, in terms of like the buyers of technology solutions, interest rates are a real factor as well. There is a bit of like, when inflation cools down, when the central bank drops rates back down. I mean, if you're a venture capitalist, if you're a private equity firm, if you're just a angel investor, you can throw 5% in a money market, get 5% return in the money market. It suddenly doesn't look so attractive to make bets on startups, make bets on new technology, make bets on new companies. It's hard to get a real calibration on how much that's influenced, but I think there's no question it has some influence on the buying patterns and spending patterns. Money was free for probably 2020, 2022 to borrow. It is very far from free right now. And for investors, it's very easy to get a pretty meaningful return by basically taking no risk.
You got it. So that means hopefully we are going to see the good things in the near future.
We have to tell ourselves that, right? As entrepreneurs. I think so. I do think we're in a bit of a nadir right now.
I also think so, because I think that companies can't stay longer in that mode. And eventually they have to get back to the previous routine and keep innovating. And to innovate, they need a workforce. Because the way
100%.
things are moving, they have to innovate now. And there's no other scene. Okay,
Yeah.
in the last
Yeah.
section, yeah, please.
I would say I totally agree. I don't know that we will or we should get back to the overheated economy of like 1 year ago or 1.5 years ago. I don't think that was good for business or entrepreneurship either. But I think the nadir that we're in right now, we will spring back from. Whether that takes 6 months or a year, that I'm a little less certain about, because I think that is tied to like interest rates and macro trends. But we will definitely move back in the right direction.
Okay, we are in the last section. And in that, we want you to give some advice to the aspiring entrepreneurs who are watching you right now, and give some advice who want to do the same business. Tell them what to do, what not to.
Yeah, I mean, two bits of personal advice I always give. The first one is don't get too into your head about the risk in starting a business. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who are afraid, like, well, what if I have to let go of these one or two people if my business doesn't work out? People find new jobs, people understand, people know what risk they're taking when they're joining a small company. Take some time to do the math. If you're not good at like doing a budget, sort of preparing a business plan, find a friend or an advisor who does. Sometimes you'd be surprised that the math is not as bad as you think in terms of the risk that you're taking. Second advice that I would give, apropos of my whole spiel earlier about like the human element, is especially in those early days, I know how overwhelming it can feel. I know it can feel like you have a million things going on. The easiest thing is to skip that one-on-one or skip that meeting. But don't give short shrift to the human element. As busy as you are in those early days, you need that team around you. Some of my biggest regrets, as I alluded to earlier, is not taking the time to build those relationships and those human connections because I was so busy doing sales and project management early on. So that would be my second tip.
That was very insightful. Thank you so much, Jay, for that much insightful discussion, because these are the real lessons. We are in the same business, and I can second every thought, because these insights are not available when you are talking to someone who is not in the software services business. And the most important part in your career was, I think, because that was a very challenging for me, and I failed in that, to convert a services based company into a product base or a part of it. And you did that. And that is so inspiring for me. Thank you so much for having us. I hope everyone learns from it and get a good idea of how to do business and what not to do.